Security, escort Ryan Caldwell out of the building immediately. He is no longer authorized to access our systems. Arthur Pendleton's cold command echoed through the boardroom, and just like that, the connection went dead. 3 weeks before that room went completely silent, I was sitting at my desk on the 14th floor of the Apex building in downtown San Francisco, looking at a stack of logistics reports. It was 7 p.m. on a rainy Thursday, and the office was mostly empty. At 47 years old, you get used to the quiet hours. I had spent 12 years of my life building the logistics division of this firm. When I started, Apex was a boutique consultancy with 10 people cramming into a shared office space. Now, we occupied 2 full floors of a glass tower on Market Street, and a significant portion of that growth was due to a single account, OmniCorp. OmniCorp was a multi-billion-dollar medical equipment manufacturer. They built everything from high-resolution MRI machines to automated insulin pumps. Their supply chain was a massive, fragile machine. If a single shipment of microprocessors from Taiwan got stuck at the port of Long Beach for 48 hours, 3 assembly plants in Ohio and Texas would grind to a halt, costing them $500,000 a day in idle labor and delayed shipments. For the past decade, I was the person who kept that machine running. I knew their carrier rates, their customs brokers, their warehouse capacities, and their emergency backup routes by heart. More importantly, I knew Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was the chief procurement officer at OmniCorp. He was 61, direct, and had zero tolerance for corporate jargon. He did not care about synergy, paradigm shifts, or holistic solutions. He cared about whether his shipments arrived on time and under budget. Over 10 years, Arthur and I had survived port strikes, global container shortages, and sudden regulatory shifts. We had built a relationship on mutual trust. When Arthur had a crisis at 2 in the morning, he did not call the Apex General line. He called my personal cell phone, and he knew I would answer. That relationship was worth $10 million a year to Apex Consulting. It was the crown jewel of our portfolio, accounting for roughly 40% of the firm's total annual revenue. Under my employment contract, which I signed back in 2014, I was entitled to a 3% commission on all accounts I personally managed and renewed. For OmniCorp, that meant a $300,000 payout, scheduled to be paid on January 15th, right after their annual renewal deposit cleared. I was finishing the final draft of the renewal proposal when my phone buzzed. It was a text from the CEO's executive assistant, asking me to come to the corner office on the 15th floor immediately. Our CEO, Richard Caldwell, was a man who had never actually managed a client account in his life. He was 58, wore custom-tailored Brioni suits, and viewed the consulting business purely as a numbers game. He had bought his way into the firm 10 years ago and had spent the last 3 years trying to cut operational costs to the bone, hoping to inflate our EBITDA and make the company attractive for a private equity acquisition. When I walked into his office, the air smelled of expensive mahogany and scotch. Richard was not alone. Sitting in one of the leather guest chairs was a young man in his late 20s, wearing a designer navy suit that was slightly too tight, with his hair slicked back with pomade. He was spinning a gold iPhone on the palm of his hand. Richard gestured for me to sit down, a tight, artificial smile on his face. He introduced the young man as Ryan Caldwell, his nephew. Richard explained that Ryan had recently completed his MBA from a business school in Southern California and had spent 3 years doing high-level consulting. I knew for a fact that Ryan's previous experience consisted of a coordinator role at a small marketing firm owned by one of Richard's golf buddies, where he had been let go after 6 months for general incompetence. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on his glass desk. He told me that as part of the firm's strategic alignment for the upcoming fiscal year, they were reorganizing the client partners division. He said that the firm wanted to inject fresh energy into their legacy accounts. He then told me that starting Monday, Ryan would be taking over the primary contact role for the OmniCorp account. I sat in silence for a moment, letting his words hang in the air. I asked him who would be handling the transition of the complex customs integration schedules and the customs compliance audits. Richard waved his hand dismissively. He said that the templates were already built and Ryan was more than capable of handling the day-to-day emails. He told me that my role would be transitioned to general business development, focusing on cold outreach for new clients in the Pacific Northwest. Ryan smiled, not looking at me, but looking at his phone. He said he looked forward to streamlining the account and finding some cost efficiencies. I looked at Richard, and then at Ryan. I understood the play instantly. The annual renewal was scheduled for January 1st. If they stripped me of the account on December 15th, Richard would argue that I was no longer the active account manager at the time of renewal. By pushing me out of the account now, they could avoid paying me my $300,000 commission. Ryan would get the credit for the renewal. Richard would save $300,000 on the firm's balance sheet, and his nephew would inherit a $10 million portfolio without having to do a single hour of real work. I looked down at the mahogany desk, then back up at Richard. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not mention the commission. I simply nodded. I told them I would compile the contact logs in the client folder and have them ready for Ryan by Monday morning. Richard looked relieved, clearly expecting a fight. He stood up, walked around the desk, and patted my shoulder, telling me that this was just business and that we all had to be team players. Ryan did not even look up as I left the room. As I walked back down to my office, I felt a calm, cold clarity wash over me. They wanted my account, and they wanted to steal the commission I had earned over a year of grueling 60-hour work weeks. But they had spent so much time looking at the numbers on the spreadsheets that they had never bothered to read the fine print in the contracts they were inheriting. For the next 2 weeks, I did exactly what I was asked to do. I did not push back, and I did not show any frustration. I compiled the standard operational folders, the generic client contact logs, and the high-level templates for the weekly status updates. I uploaded them all to the shared network drive and sent a polite, brief email to Ryan, copying Richard, letting them know that the handover files were complete. Ryan took over my office on the 14th floor the following Monday. He did not waste any time. By noon, he had already ordered a new ergonomic leather chair, replaced my framed industry certifications with a neon sign of his favorite college football team, and spent most of his time talking loudly on his speakerphone about his weekend plans. He never asked me a single question about the actual logistics of OmniCorp. He never asked about the specific EDI 8550 purchase order routing, the carrier allocation matrices, or how we handled the customs and border protection audits for the medical equipment imports. When he saw me in the break room, he asked if he could just copy-paste last year's slides for the upcoming quarterly business review with OmniCorp. I looked him in the eye and told him that the format had worked well in the past. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his phone. He had no idea that last year's slides relied on a legacy database integration that was scheduled to be decommissioned on December 20th, and that the new system required a manual API token refresh that only I knew how to execute. I was not about to volunteer that information. The trap was set on December 15th. I arrived at the office at 8:30 in the morning. When I tried to scan my security badge at the elevator lobby, the light flashed red. The security guard, a man named Frank whom I had known for 10 years and whose son I had helped get an internship, looked at me with an apologetic expression. He told me that my badge had been deactivated and that I needed to wait in the lobby for HR. A few minutes later, Evelyn Pierce, the HR director, came down and escorted me to the glass-walled conference room next to the reception desk. Richard was already sitting there. He did not look me in the eye. Instead, he was looking at a thin manila folder on the table. Evelyn sat down and delivered the script she had probably rehearsed dozens of times. She told me that due to restructuring and the consolidation of the client management team, my position was being eliminated effective immediately. She pushed a 3-page document across the table. It was a separation agreement. The terms were insulting. They were offering me a severance package of $15,000, barely 2 weeks of pay for my 12 years of service, on the condition that I sign a comprehensive release of claims. The release contained strict non-disparagement clauses, a waiver of my right to sue for breach of contract, and an acknowledgement that all commissions for the current fiscal year were forfeited because I would not be an employee on the distribution date of January 15th. Richard leaned forward, putting on his best paternal tone. He told me that this was a generous package given the current market conditions. He said that if I signed it today, they would write the check immediately, and we could part as friends. He added that if I chose not to sign it, they would hold the funds, and it would take months of legal back and forths that would only end up costing me more than the severance itself. I read through the document slowly. I did not raise my voice. I did not point out the hypocrisy of firing a partner who had just secured their largest contract renewal. I looked at the clause regarding the forfeiture of my $300,000 commission. I knew that under California labor law, earned commissions are considered wages, and attempting to forfeit them through a post-employment waiver is highly illegal if the employee has already completed the material work required to earn them. I slid the document back across the table. I told them I would not be signing it today. I said I would take the document home and have my legal counsel review it, as was my right under federal law. Richard's paternal facade evaporated instantly. His face hardened, and his voice became cold. He told me that I was making a big mistake. He said that I was a 47-year-old consultant in a market flooded with hungry 20-something MBA graduates who would work for a third of my salary. He told me that if I did not sign the agreement by 5 p.m., the offer would be permanently withdrawn, and he would make sure that my reputation in the San Francisco consulting scene was completely ruined. I stood up. I did not look at Richard. I looked at Evelyn and thanked her for her time. I picked up the small cardboard box that they had already packed with my personal belongings, my coffee mug, a few family photos, and a physical notebook, and walked out of the conference room. Security escorted me to the elevators and then out of the building. I walked out into the cool San Francisco rain carrying my box. I walked down Market Street to a small coffee shop, ordered a black coffee, and sat by the window. I felt a deep, quiet sense of clarity. For 12 years, I had carried the weight of Apex Consulting on my shoulders, working late nights, traveling on weekends, and saving the firm from their own operational incompetence. Now that weight was gone. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought they had saved $300,000 and secured a $10 million account for the CEO's nephew. But they had spent so much time celebrating their victory that they forgot to look at the foundations of the house they were standing on. On December 16th, the morning after my termination, I sat down at my kitchen table with a hot cup of coffee and opened my personal laptop. I did not open any proprietary databases, and I did not download any confidential client lists. I did not need to. I had a clean, physical copy of my own employment agreement from 2014 and a copy of the Master Services Agreement between Apex Consulting and OmniCorp. I had kept these documents on file for years, a standard habit for anyone in high-level corporate services. I turned to Section 14, Clause 4 of the OmniCorp MSA. It was the key man provision, a clause I had personally insisted on inserting when we negotiated the contract renewal 3 years ago. The language was clear and unambiguous. Marcus Vance is designated as the key person for the duration of this agreement. In the event that the key person is removed, terminated, or ceases to provide active, day-to-day management of the services, OmniCorp reserves the right, at its sole discretion, to terminate this agreement for convenience upon 5 days' written notice to Apex Consulting Group, without penalty or further liability. Additionally, Clause 14.5 stated that Apex was contractually obligated to notify OmniCorp's procurement department in writing within 24 hours of any change in status regarding the designated key person. I knew Richard Caldwell had no intention of sending that notice. His entire strategy relied on keeping OmniCorp in the dark until after the January 1st renewal was signed and the $10 million deposit was wired to Apex's bank account. He would likely keep my email active, have Ryan reply to messages under my name, or claim I was on an extended medical leave until the contract was legally locked in. Once the money cleared, it would be too late for OmniCorp to pull out without facing massive early termination penalties. At 9:15 a.m., I drafted a short professional email from my personal account and sent it to Arthur Pendleton. The text was dry, factual, and devoid of any emotional venting. I wrote, "Dear Arthur, I wanted to personally inform you that my employment with Apex Consulting Group has been terminated as of December 15th. As a result, I will no longer be managing OmniCorp's account or overseeing the upcoming logistics systems integration. It has been an honor working with you and your team over the last 12 years, and I wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors. Sincerely, Marcus Vance. I clicked send. I did not ask him to hire me. I did not suggest that he terminate Apex. I simply provided him with the factual information he was contractually entitled to receive. 30 miles away in San Jose, Arthur Pendleton was sitting in his office, reviewing the shipping manifests for a $3 million consignment of medical microprocessors. The shipment was currently on a cargo vessel, crossing the Pacific, scheduled to dock at the Port of Oakland on December 22nd. The customs clearance for this specific shipment relied entirely on the new database integration that was scheduled to migrate on December 20th. When my email popped up on his screen, Arthur read it twice. He then looked at another email he had received earlier that morning from an address he did not recognize. It was from Ryan Caldwell. The email read, "Hey Arthur, I'm Ryan, the new lead partner here at Apex. Just wanted to reach out and say how excited I am to collaborate and bring some fresh synergy to the OmniCorp account. Let's schedule a Zoom call next week to touch base." Arthur did not reply to Ryan. Instead, he picked up his desk phone and dialed the number for the lead partner on his account. Ryan answered from my former office. Arthur did not waste time with small talk. He asked Ryan if the API database migration scheduled for December 20th had been pre-cleared with the customs brokers at the Port of Oakland, and whether the EDI transaction logs were configured to handle the new automated customs manifests. There was a long, awkward silence on the other end of the line. Then Ryan began stammering, using a flurry of corporate buzzwords. He said he would double-click on those details with the technical team and circle back by the end of the week. He assured Arthur that they were taking a holistic approach to the transition and that everything was under control. Arthur cut him off. He asked Ryan if he knew the specific customs bond number required for the import of medical electronics under FDA regulations. Ryan did not know. He did not even know what a customs bond was. Arthur hung up the phone. He knew right then that without my oversight, his $3 million shipment was going to get stuck in customs storage for weeks. The delay would halt assembly lines in Ohio, cause OmniCorp to miss their holiday delivery targets, and trigger massive SLA penalties from their retail distributors. Arthur called the head of OmniCorp's legal department into his office. He handed him a copy of my email and a copy of the MSA. He pointed out that Apex had failed to notify them of my termination within the mandatory 24-hour window, which was a clear material breach of the notification clause. More importantly, he pointed out that the removal of the key person gave OmniCorp the absolute right to walk away. By 2 p.m. that afternoon, OmniCorp's legal team had drafted an official notice of termination under Section 14, Clause 4. The letter stated that due to the unauthorized removal of the designated key person, Marcus Vance, OmniCorp was exercising its right to terminate the Master Services Agreement for convenience, effective in 5 business days. The letter also stated that all pending contract renewals were suspended, and the annual deposit of $10 million scheduled for December 28th would not be executed. The letter was sent via certified mail and electronic delivery directly to Richard Caldwell's office. When OmniCorp's termination notice hit Richard Caldwell's desk on the morning of December 18th, the executive floor of Apex Consulting descended into absolute chaos. The news spread through the company like wildfire. A $10 million contract was not just a loss on a spreadsheet. It was 40% of the firm's entire annual revenue. To make matters worse, Apex had a $6 million line of credit with a regional commercial bank. The terms of that credit agreement contained a strict debt service covenant, which required the firm to maintain a minimum annual recurring revenue of $20 million. Without OmniCorp, Apex's revenue plummeted to $15 million. The moment the bank received word of the termination, they would declare a technical default, freeze the firm's operating accounts, and demand immediate repayment of the outstanding debt. Ryan was in a state of sheer panic. He spent the morning running in and out of the CEO's office, trying to blame the IT department for database issues and claiming that Arthur Pendleton was simply a difficult client who was looking for an excuse to leave. But Richard knew better. He knew exactly why Arthur had walked away. At 11:15 a.m., my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed Richard's personal number. I pressed record on my computer's audio interface and answered the call. Richard did not even say hello. He began screaming into the receiver, his voice shaking with rage. He accused me of tortious interference, violating my non-solicitation agreement, and stealing proprietary client data to sabotage the firm. He told me that I was a thief and that he was going to instruct the firm's legal counsel to file an emergency injunction in court by the end of the day. He yelled that he would spend every dollar the company had to tie me up in litigation for the next 5 years, ruin my reputation, and make sure I ended up bankrupt and unemployable. I sat at my kitchen table, listening quietly. I let him scream until he ran out of breath, his panting filling the silence of the line. When he finally stopped, I spoke. My voice was calm, slow, and measured. I told him that first, he needed to take a deep breath. I then reminded him that we were in California. Under California Business and Professions Code, Section 16,600, employee non-compete agreements are void and completely unenforceable as a matter of public policy. Even if I had actively solicited OmniCorp, which I had not, any non-compete clause in my contract was legally worthless. Second, I told him that I did not solicit the client. I sent a factual, polite notification of my employment status, which was a matter of public record. More importantly, under Clause 14.5 of the Master Services Agreement that Richard himself had signed, Apex was contractually obligated to notify OmniCorp of my departure within 24 hours. By attempting to hide my firing to secure the renewal deposit, Richard had committed a material breach of the agreement. I had simply done what Apex was legally required to do. Third, I informed him that I was recording the phone call. While California is a two-party consent state for recording communications, there is a specific exception under California Penal Code Section 6310 for recordings made to gather evidence of extortion, blackmail, or illegal employment blacklisting. His threats to destroy my career and use corporate funds to bankrupt me fell squarely under that category, making the recording fully admissible in court. Additionally, I informed him that my attorney, Sarah Jenkins, was currently finalizing a wage theft complaint with the California Labor Commissioner. The complaint targeted the $300,000 in unpaid commissions that I had contractually earned by managing the OmniCorp account through the performance period, plus interest and waiting time penalties under Labor Code Section 203. I told him that if his legal department wanted to send any correspondence, they could direct it to Sarah's office in San Francisco. I wished him a good afternoon and hung up the phone. I learned later from a former colleague in HR that after I hung up, Richard immediately called the firm's general counsel into his office. He demanded that they draft a lawsuit against me immediately. The general counsel, a veteran corporate attorney, who actually understood the law, read my employment contract, reviewed the MSA, and told Richard flatly that they had no case. He warned Richard that if they sued me, we would countersue for wrongful termination and wage theft. Under California law, if a court found that the firm had willfully withheld my commission, Apex would be liable for double damages, attorney fees, and the individual executives who authorized the withholding could be held personally liable. By 3 p.m., the board of directors had caught wind of the bank's default notice and the impending loss of the OmniCorp account. They realized that Richard's attempt to save $300,000 on my commission had put the entire $25 million firm on the brink of financial ruin. They called an emergency board meeting for the following morning. The emergency board meeting on December 19th was short and brutal. The board members, who represented the primary shareholders and institutional investors of Apex Consulting, had no personal loyalty to Richard Caldwell. They cared about the firm's valuation, its credit line, and the $10 million hole that had just been blown in their balance sheet. The general counsel presented the legal reality. Richard's actions had exposed the firm to a high-probability wage theft lawsuit, triggered a material breach of our most valuable client contract, and put the firm in technical default with the bank. The board voted unanimously to terminate Richard Caldwell for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty, effective immediately. By firing him for cause, they successfully voided his golden parachute severance package, saving the firm over $500,000 in exit payouts. Ryan was escorted from the building by security. Less than an hour later, his neon sports sign left behind in his former office. The board appointed Thomas Sterling, our chief financial officer, as the interim CEO. Thomas was a practical, detail-oriented man who had been with the firm since its inception. He knew that the only way to save Apex from bankruptcy was to resolve the legal dispute and attempt to salvage whatever relationship was left with OmniCorp. On the morning of December 20th, Thomas called me. His tone was polite, professional, and deeply apologetic. He asked if I would be open to a meeting to discuss a resolution. I agreed, on the condition that the meeting take place at the offices of my attorney, Sarah Jenkins. 2 hours later, Thomas and the firm's outside counsel sat across from Sarah and me in a high-rise conference room overlooking the bay. Thomas did not play games. He laid out a settlement proposal. Apex would pay me the full $300,000 commission immediately, wire an additional $75,000 as a severance payment, and cover $25,000 of my legal fees. In exchange, they wanted a mutual release of all claims, a strict non-disparagement agreement, and my assistance in managing a smooth transition of the OmniCorp account to a new, experienced partner at Apex. I looked at Thomas. I told him that I would accept the financial settlement, the severance, and the legal fees. I would sign the mutual release of claims. However, I could not help them transition the OmniCorp account. I had already filed the paperwork to register my own independent consultancy, Vance Advisory Group LLC. OmniCorp's contracts belonged to OmniCorp, and they had already exercised their right to terminate their agreement with Apex. Thomas's lawyer tried to object, arguing that I was planning to compete with the firm. Sarah immediately intervened, pointing out that in California, any agreement that restrains anyone from engaging in a lawful profession, trade, or business of any kind is void under Section 16,600. Apex had no legal mechanism to prevent me from working with OmniCorp, and trying to force me to transition the client under duress would only lead to a public lawsuit that the bank would not tolerate. Thomas looked at his lawyer, then back at me. He signed the settlement agreement. The wire transfer of $400,000 cleared into my account by 5 p.m. that afternoon. On December 23rd, Arthur Pendleton called my cell phone. He had received the news of Richard's termination and the settlement. Arthur told me that the legal department had finalized the termination of the Apex contract. He said that he had no interest in working with whoever Apex put in my place. He said that OmniCorp had worked with me for 12 years because I was the one who kept their factories running, not the logo on the Apex letterhead. He asked me if Vance Advisory Group was ready to take on the account. He offered a new, direct contract worth $12 million for the upcoming year, which included a $2 million expansion to manage their new European logistics hubs. On January 2nd, Vance Advisory Group officially opened its doors. I rented a modest office space in San Jose, closer to OmniCorp's headquarters. I did not need a lavish floor on Market Street or expensive mahogany furniture. I hired 3 of the top logistics analysts and systems engineers from Apex, the same people who had worked under me for years and had been planning to resign in protest of my firing. I offered them a 20% raise, profit sharing, and a work culture free of corporate politics. Richard Caldwell is currently facing a derivative shareholder lawsuit from Apex's minor partners for breach of fiduciary duty, and his career in the San Francisco consulting scene is effectively over. Ryan is back to living in Southern California, looking for entry-level positions without his uncle's corporate influence to protect him. Sometimes, executives in Brioni suits think they own the business because their names are on the door and their titles are on the organization chart. They believe that clients are just numbers on a spreadsheet and that employees are easily replaceable parts. But they forget that in the world of high-stakes corporate service, the real asset isn't the office building, the brand name, or the family connection. The real asset is the trust you build, the problems you solve, and the relationships you earn. And those are assets that no CEO can ever take away from you.